talk about Mr. J. Embry, shall we? Pavarotti. Because his newest video is full of a lot of lies and misinformation. So I'm going to play you some segments from it and then we're going to discuss. So let's get started.
And it's a multiple perp crime. I had a very simple theory. Bryan Kohberger was hired to do this with somebody else. They were hired to do it. Let me figure it out. And the conclusion that I came to was law enforcement believed that it was Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopacka who committed this crime. Go back and watch.
Oh, good Lord. I can't wait to see where this one's going, because at nowhere at any time did Moscow police or the FBI or Idaho State Police ever think that Brent Kopacka was involved with the Idaho 4. In fact, this came out after he was, unfortunately, I mean, we can go into that situation another time, but after he was shot and killed by the SWAT team, this is what they said. So it said, a SWAT standoff in Pullman on Thursday that ended with police shooting and killing a 30-year-old man. Now, that was wrong because Kopacka was older than that, and they did correct that later, but is not believed to be connected to the Idaho murders, according to the Washington State Patrol.
And that's when I really dove in and I found the parties that were really responsible, the connections, and so much more.
So let me see. How many different people have you thought committed the crime now? About 550? 600? I don't know. Are you still on the cartel theory? Are you still on the Fetty Brothers theory? Are you still on the Kopacka theory? Well, it seems like you're on the back to the Kopacka theory again. So isn't that interesting? It seems like every time documents come out that disprove you, you just try to change it around again or double down on one of your original thoughts. But let's continue.
What law enforcement truly believed, what this case was about that they hid from you from the start, was the fact that this case has always been about Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopacka. I don't know why the defense let them keep it quiet the entire time. And it's about to come out, I assure you. It's about to come out, but we've got to pounce on it because this is what they thought the whole time, what they tried to hide from everybody, and it's not the truth. We've got the truth now. I know who committed this crime.
So you're telling me that they thought Brent Kopacka was involved, even though there's nothing in any of the records that shows he was even investigated as a suspect. And also, you know who committed the murders, really, because you've been wrong. You've been batting zero, okay, dude? You wouldn't even make a wiffle ball roster with your batting average. But let's continue.
But they only focused in on 2 of the 4 deceased in discovery. So that tells you that 2 of the 4 deceased that they focused on in discovery are the 2 that matters. Those are the 2 targets.
Dude, no, they didn't only focus in on 2 in discovery. That's just the AT&T records, okay? All 4 victims were focused in on. But 2 of the victims had AT&T. Okay. And another had Verizon. Another had T-Mobile. We're going to get into that. But that is a lie to say that they only focused in on 2 of the victims in discovery. What you probably meant to say was they focused in on 2 of them with the AT&T records. But there's a reason for that. So let's continue.
To depict how cellular phone records analyzed in this case will be represented on a map, specifically for phones associated with Bryan Kohberger, Madison Mogen, and Xana Kernodle. So they're only talking about Kohberger, Mogen, and Kernodle, and they're putting phones on a map. And this is for the 23 trips. They were going to show a map, show Kohberger was here, Maddie and Xana were here, because during the trial, they were going to name Maddie and Xana as the likely targets for this case, y'all.
Well, we don't know if they were going to name anyone as likely targets, and that information does not prove that they were naming Maddie and Xana as the likely targets. And we're going to continue because I will explain all of this once we get through all of your gobbledygook misinformation.
But then, right here, pages 26 and 27 show the usage of phones associated with Madison Mogen and Xana Kernodle during the morning of November 13th, 2022, during times when evidence indicates that both phones were located inside the residence at 1122 King Road, depicted by the crime scene icon. So they were going to show exactly what time that Xana Kernodle returned home. These pages will be used to highlight that drive test data is consistent with the locations of both these cellular phones when evidence shows their location inside the King Road residence.
So, what Pop is trying to do there is misinform you with the records. I don't know if he doesn't understand them or if he knows exactly what they mean, but he's choosing to ignore it so that he can continue the grift. But those AT&T records that Nicholas Balance mentions in that supplement S1 are because Maddie and Xana are the only two that lived in the house that have AT&T. It wasn't because they were the targets or that they think they were the targets. It's strictly because inmate 163214 had an AT&T device and two people that lived in the house had AT&T. Kaylee and Ethan had different carriers. Bethany and Dylan also did not have AT&T. And we know this from the records, from the warrants. So only Maddie and Xana had AT&T. Their records are being used by Nick Balance strictly for comparison purposes. Because he did drive testing. Oh, and by the way, remember Mr. Cy Ray tried to claim that Nick Balance never did drive testing for 1122 King? He did. He did. He's got the drive testing, and it's mentioned in that document. He's using Xana and Maddie's as phones that were at 1122 for how AT&T devices act when they ping off those towers in Moscow. And he's comparing it to how inmate 163214's device acted. Now, had he tried to compare inmate 163214's to a Verizon phone or a T-Mobile phone, that could have been thrown out. There could have been a Daubert challenge because it would have been apples to oranges. Nick Balance knows what he's doing. He's a seasoned cast expert. So he's comparing apples to apples, AT&T to AT&T. So I hope that makes sense. If you need me to explain that further, let me know. But it was strictly about the networks being the same. And remember, Balance had found that inmate 163214's phone had pinged within 100 meters of 1122 on 23 occasions. So that's within 350 feet of the house. How he determined a lot of that also was the behavior of Xana and Maddie's phones as well when they were in the house. Apples to apples. But let's continue, shall we? Because good old Pav wants you to think that inmate 163214, at least in the eyes of MPD and ISP and FBI, was a co-conspirator with Brent Kopacka. And nothing could be farther from the truth.
But what it doesn't show you in this report is what they haven't been showing you the entire time in this case. And that is they not only were focused in on Brent Kopacka, Madison Mogen, and Xana Kernodle, but they had this one that they seemed to leave off of all the reports that they released to us. But they always leave a breadcrumb of trails for us to know who's on that report and also to know that they're leaving somebody off when we look at this stuff. Now time for the big reveal.
Oh, yes, because they always leave people off the reports. that they think are suspects. It's time for the big reveal. Ooh, hold on to your hats, folks. I think we already know who he thinks the big reveal is, and he's incorrect.
And you see, the big reveal actually was already revealed to us a long time ago. You see, this that I read to you a minute ago, where Ann Taylor was talking about the state producing the actual AT&T time in advance records for 2 of the 4 deceased in Discovery, Maddie and Xana, that we now learn are the 2. Well, they said something else in this one as well that I've got blacked out right here. And this was in the defense's reply to the motion, or the defense's motion in limine for AT&T time in advance records that they were trying to get for Brent Kopacka. But this cryptic statement right here, that's why I knew right where to go back and find it, has always perplexed me. Because I always wanted them to name 2 of the 4 deceased. Now we got the new reports and we finally got it. They named Maddie and Xana like we knew the whole time. But they also said something else that I find very curious in this. She said AT&T cell towers and individual time in advance records for 2 of the 4 deceased, and 1 for a person who had been a person of interest at the beginning of the investigation, as well as over 3,800 people on the cell tower. But they have timing advance records not only for 2 of the 4 deceased, 3,800 people on the cell tower, but also specifically. And that's why you got to put this together right here. Because now they named Maddie and Xana, but they still didn't name this person who had been a person of interest at the beginning of the investigation. But they always call this person a person of interest at the beginning of the investigation. We know who it is. It's pretty simple. So we can go to this police report where they're talking about Brent Kopacka and his apartment manager, and they say it every way. Anytime Brent comes up, it says the same thing. In addition to this information, during my initial phone call with L, the apartment manager, he told me he was painting the apartment of Brent Kopacka, the previous tenant, and person named in tips during the initial investigation. They always talk about Brent Kopacka as somebody in the initial investigation that was a person of interest or a person named in tips. It ain't that hard to figure out, folks, and they're about to release this to the public. They have no choice now.
So much to unpack there. No, they're not about to release that to the public because that's absolutely false. Okay, first of all, that's the only time that Brent Kopacka was ever mentioned in any document in the case, and it's because of the apartment manager calling in a tip. And guess when that tip was called in? Let's take a look. So the tip was called in on February 18th, 2023. So well after inmate 163214's DNA was already identified and he was arrested. So tips that were coming in about Kopacka were all after the swatting incident. And when Pav claims that they always mention him as a person of interest, no. A person being mentioned in tips, a subject of tips, is not the same as a person of interest. Not anywhere even close. Okay? And Kopacka wasn't even investigated further. Also, the knife that was called in on the tip was a serrated cooking style blade. So it was immediately ruled out as not being relevant because we know that it was a non-serrated single-edge blade that was used in the Idaho 4 murders. So the blade that was found outside Kopacka's apartment, not relevant. Kopacka wasn't listed ever as a person of interest or as a suspect or a subject at all in the Idaho 4 case. Now, pardon my chicken scratch, But we do know who the person of interest was that Ann Taylor was talking about in that motion in limine, because he was also mentioned as one of her 4 alternate perpetrators. He was one of the early suspects or person of interest along with Jack Ducour, and that was Jack Showalter. So you'll see right there, and I've blocked the phone numbers out, but this was in that document drop that was unredacted that they later pulled back. You can see the 3 people that they were interested in that had AT&T that they had received time in advance for were Xana, Maddie, and Jack Showalter. Those were the 3 phone numbers that they were focused on. And then down here you can see the Verizon time in advance. That was Ethan, Bethany, and Jack Ducour. And then Kaylee and Ethan had like T-Mobile. But it was Jack Showalter, not Brent Kopacka. Okay? He was the early person of interest. Jack Ducour was also an early person of interest. We know that from documents that have been released. Nowhere in any document does it state that Brent Kopacka was ever a person of interest or a suspect. So good old Pav is wrong yet again. He's misreading documents like usual. Either that or he's just doing it on purpose. But either way, it's not right. It's downright disgusting. And trying to blame a military vet who is not even around to be able to defend himself from these allegations is the lowest of the low. So not good at all. But no, the AT&T documents were being used just as comparison. Doesn't mean Maddie and Xana were the targets. And nowhere in any document anywhere does it show that Brent Kopacka was ever a person of interest or a suspect. The person of interest that was mentioned was Jack Showalter. And then, of course, Jack was able to be ruled out as well. And we all know that inmate 163214 was who the evidence ended up leading to. He pled guilty, and he's now behind bars where he belongs.